so automatically because I was so embarrassed. I mean, I was really embarrassed. Um, Now I'm okay about it. It's like, all right, so there was a big fight. So um, now I have to go back in and deal with what I really think about it and talk to each person and be engaged in the content and the process of what went on. But that was my belief system conversation was a filler. I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's the closest I can get to, I think, maybe what you're talking about.
Well, this is really interesting, I think, and helpful in that what I understand systems thinking to be about is to be able to see the bigger picture and why there's reactivity in family and acknowledge what our automatic belief response to it is, and maybe to get a more separate view to be able to both um, be challenged by what's going on when the reactivity happens, and then to look at it differently, and that contributes to the belief systems going deeper. Does that
Right.
make sense to you?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing that I should add that I forgot, it's amazing I forgot this. After the wedding, about 4 days, I decided I would do what Dr. Bowen does or Dr. Friedman did. So I wrote emails to everybody, but based on my principles, but I was so zizzed up that it was like goofy. They were goofy letters based on my principles. I felt like they had done it, so why not? I should do it. I should have waited a bit. But so you keep trying to what principles are. It defines the way you think about any challenge. And for me, I need the time and rigor to sit down and think about it over time. I can't do it based on some principles I've had. I need to really take the time.
It's really encouraging people, you, me, whatever, to take the time to not to slow oneself down, but to notice that the automatic stuff is there for a reason too.
I should really show people the letters. They're embarrassing. I believe.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
think
of
that
course, I got the responsiveness.
right, right. I often tell the story of shaming my whole congregation about stewardship things because it was a reaction I was having to a bad stewardship campaign. But it was all principled. So
Oh, God.
yes, that's I think they're very helpful in thinking. So one of our participants is asking a question about what it was about the emails that you would say were problematic. I think that you answered that, but can you say that in a more succinct way?
Sure. My oldest daughter, and I'm an oldest and she's an oldest, um, really is a very well-known author and speaker and writer on the subject of bullying. So after this big fight, she said, "This is your work, Mother. Why aren't you saying anything? Like, why aren't you taking a stand, Mother? You know, what do you think?" I mean, she says, "Come on, Mom, step up. Do your what?" And instead of saying to her, "Listen, my thought processes need time," I responded with an email that wasn't well thought out and didn't have a kind of a systems approach to it. And so it wasn't crisp, it wasn't clear, and it was more a response to wanting to say something to my oldest daughter that I wasn't a complete flake. But I should have said to her, I need the time to think about this. So I think often leaders are required to say things before they've thought it through. So for me, I came back with kind of platitudes. Families have differences. Um, Building the capacity. I mean, this isn't so goofy, but the way I explained it was kind of superficial. It was, families have differences. The ability of a family to live with differences is what builds capacity in the individual and the group. To communicate them as my ideas. It felt rather formulaic. And that's what I mean, it was goofy. I just didn't think it through. And I was responding from the pressure from my daughter to step up and have an opinion about
it. And I would guess, speaking out of my own experience, I have sensitivities to people asking me to step up because of my family story, where I had some pressure to do that too, and did that unsuccessfully and sometimes better than others. But I just wonder if we can move now to you talking a little bit about your family and what it prepared you with, and to talk a little bit about the nodal events, Kathy, that have challenged your sense of self and leadership. So what we have, folks, is on the lower right-hand side of the screen is Files 3, and Kathy's providing us with her family diagram and also a list of some nodal events that she's aware of in her life. And you can click on the diagram as she is talking about it. You can download it. It allows you to do that. And Kathy said she's fine with you having a copy of her family diagram, just so you know. So we've already talked about that. And that she can't imagine that any of you want to keep it. But it probably is a prompt to for all of our continued work in this area. So Kathy, would you talk about your diagram a little bit? And so I'll invite you to download that now. If they'd like to look at that, have a visual about that. And Kathy's going to just spend a little bit of time talking through that. And she's made reference to a couple of things that have been key lately. So.
Right. I am the leftmost circle there, 1944. That's me. I'm the oldest of 4 girls. And I was married for 38 years and divorced, and have a extremely good and important relationship with my ex and with his family now, which was a huge, I'll talk about that in a minute. But I am the oldest of 4 girls. My mother died when I was 18, and my father died when I was 30. So by the time I was 30, I was the senior most member of my family. One of the things, when I started thinking with Dr. Bowen and Dr. Friedman, I had a superficial understanding and relationship with my aunts and uncles who have all since died. But I would say that my effort is that they knew me and I knew them extremely well when they died. What happened in my family is that I married shortly after my mother died, and married a man whose mother was larger than life, a high emotionally charged woman. And I believe, I adored my husband. I still like him a lot now. I think I married the family because of the intensity in my husband's family and the extraordinary depression that was following a mother's death. And my dad, who while he was an attorney and started a law firm, was really in real sadness for a long period of time. I was the oldest. I had a way of taking over in many situations. So I joined my husband's family with great gusto. And it went really well until it didn't go really well. And there were a series of events. My husband, who was a lawyer, eventually left the practice of law and went to work in his family business. And it was a, a cauldron of upset and anxiety and change and governmental intervention with the EPA. And it was an extraordinarily robust and conflictual family business. And so I married a lawyer, and he went and joined a family business, and I picked up a great deal of the tension, and the tension went into the marriage between Steve and myself. What I think is important is that, and these, is that the individual, you see me there, but this larger family unit is what I am always dealing with in my life, professionally and personally. And I can, I was born into a family where my dad was in Europe and didn't see him until he came back after 3 years. I lived in that maternal triangle with her mom, with my grandmother, and I learned to mitigate the upset that went on between my mother and grandmother. So I am a natural person to go into upset. I'm attracted to it. It's my work. And I would have said that what's happened to me is I've changed from an absorber to an observer of upset and a pretty good describer of it. But I want to describe a series of things that happened. So I met Dr. Bowen shortly after my second child was born. And the marriage became very conflictual. And I went to see Dr. Bowen professionally. And it clicked. I saw how it fit business-wise. I saw how it fit family-wise. And I started understanding my part in this, that I was attached to Steve's family, not to my own, that I needed to develop a sense of my own life. I went back to graduate school to get an MBA with 2 kids. And when Steve decided to move to Pittsburgh, before he had been commuting, I said I didn't think I would do that. I would stay and finish my degree at George Washington, which was a real dilemma for the family. Why follow their husbands? And I said, I think I'm going to finish my degree. Now, I could have gone to Pitt or to Carnegie Mellon, but I knew that I needed to be separate. Fast forward, the business goes up and down, and I keep learning theory. And there is an event that happened, which is where I mark the point where I became a self. And I'm not saying this that anyone needs to do what I did, but I had studied enough. I had made contact in my own family, so I had more solid ground to operate on, and my family welcomed me back. We were called into the business was thriving and doing really well, and they had an offer by a company to put a lot of money into the business. They're talking big money, and we're in a fancy law office in Pittsburgh, and they called me in, and they went through the pro forma, and they looked at the projections, and we were going to be very wealthy. And the only thing I had to do was sign my house. I had to support this loan from this company for this great expansion to make all this money. I just had to sign over my house. And, all the projections were spectacular. This was wealth beyond anything I'd ever thought, because it involved oil, and there was all kinds of embargoes on oil. And I listened to it, and when they said, would you, here's the paper to sign over your house, I said, I'm not going to do it. And the reason I'm not going to do it is because I get too anxious if my house is up for grabs. This business could go up and down, and God, I hope people make $1 billion from it. I don't want that money. I just want to be able to sleep at night while I'm at graduate school. I don't want to hear Steve anxious on the phone from Pittsburgh saying that they lost a contract and that I start to worry about it. I knew myself well enough. And so I said, I'm not going to do it. Well, Steve wasn't mad at me, but his parents never forgave me. And it makes sense. His parents were Holocaust survivors. People, family, did for each other at the expense of the self. You do not do something for yourself when it profits. I get it. I got it then. But I knew that this business, up and down, and the cycles of it, and the oil markets could have the potential of making me sick. And so I said no. And that was the first time that I was ever able, besides not moving to Pittsburgh, to be able to say, I want you all to be really rich, but I'm not putting my house in there. And I can't believe with all the zeros that my house is going to make such a difference. Well, they went on and they got the loan and the business failed. And I became the outsider in that family because of what I did. But I am here to tell you, and my kids were disinherited, so they lost their inheritance, and because of what I did. And as of 2 months ago, I have reconnected with my sister-in-law and brother-in-law and nieces in a substantial way. I am now considered the heroine of the family. So it's taken 20 years, 15, 10 years, and being able to be a self in a highly emotional, dependent, important system. And this was a fun system to be in. They were, attractive, and they did fun things. But I took a stand for myself that resulted in they really pushed me away, and it's taken this long to come back and to be in relationship with them. So for me...
Can I interrupt
Yeah.
you at that point, Kathy?
Sure.
Just a quick point or question. It seems that goes to having a picture and the long view about this work, that what would be considered a cutoff as a result of you standing for yourself, that you had to be persistent and have in mind to look at the timing and wait to see if something might shift that would reconnect you. And the other question, just observing that, I have another question too. What do you think about that?
Let me answer it. I've always had an appreciation for the cost of seeing the broader system and taking a stand. I understand. And maybe if I had been more mature at the time, I could have signed my house in there and not been so responsive. Part of it was that I couldn't tolerate hearing the upset. What's the big deal? So I don't, what I want to impress is that there were a series of events that happened in the system that had real repercussions. But the way I thought about it was, this is my family. I've known them for years. I am not going to put an effort, no matter how long it takes, to stay connected with them. And my kids were mad at me, and my ex-husband thought I was crazy, and I said, these were family to me. I am staying connected. So I think it's back to what you have in your head, what's important. What was important to me was that I take a stand, but not let the system determine what happened afterwards. So it meant enormous strategy. one of the things that this theory has taught, you don't just kind of wing it in relationships. You have to think about it. And I have thought about it, and that's what takes so much time. So I'm not sure that answers it, but the ability to see the bigger system and your place in it, and that anything you do has repercussions, so pay attention. You know, being a self isn't always considered a plus, unless, I mean, I consider it a plus, but I would say that these experiences have taught me a lot and has made it possible for me to go into very hot situations and be a resource to people.
I guess I'm hearing also that the move to take a stand is never pure, and that you're saying in the repercussions that to stand in the repercussions, knowing that you've contributed something that is defining and helpful in some way, but it also has other things that might have to be worked out over a long period of time.
Exactly. The thing, Emlyn, that really, I think I just got in touch with it. This way of thinking is so challenging and exciting. You are called to think at a different level, and it is really fun not to be so automatic. To know you're automatic, and then to know you have some choice. It's really it's fun. I can't say it any other way.
Yeah, it frees up more energy, I think, too. So would you say it's fun to know that you don't have to be automatic? It's fun.
You know, it's not fun at a wedding where your children are acting poorly. But when I think about it now, it's been 6 months, you know, it's kind of humorous. I mean, there's a certain kind of irony to it, that here I am getting paid to help families, and my own family is acting out on the dance floor in front of everybody I ever known. You know.
How human. How human, right?
But they were all dressed. They look nice. You know, yeah. They were all dressed up.
And what a great time at a family nodal event to do it, too.
Right. So embarrassing.
And to get this, keep a sense of humor long term about it too, to be able to look back and go, oh my God.
It was great.
So I interrupted you on that little rabbit trail, but you were talking about the place where you believe the kernel of self emerged, and then there were repercussions.
I want to speak a little bit about nodal events, change in a family, and impact on an individual. I'm speaking personally, but I am part of a large interconnected professional system and family system. So while you see me sitting in front of you, I want you to think about that family diagram that's right on top of my head. I also think that change is a constant, and that all of us are trying to seek equal homeostasis with all this change that's going on. So I've got a daughter who moves to Boulder. I have another daughter who's in a new career. I have a granddaughter who's born with a disability. I have an ex who's had a divorce. The family is trying to maintain a way of functioning, a homeostatic balance. And when all this change goes on, there are real and imagined threats involved. And those real and imagined threats are what fuels anxiety, which makes it hard to think. So I think the most significant one for me was 3 years ago, my son, um, after a time of loss in the family, I had lost two uncles, my mother's brothers. I had taken on a new job. My oldest daughter had moved to Boulder from Washington. A series of notable events. My granddaughter was born with a severe disability, and I couldn't think straight. So all of this change going on, and then this enormous challenge to the system, as I perceived it, was how are we going to manage this significant challenge to our family? And my behavior was ridiculous. Um, and I can talk about it, but it was an oldest sister on steroids wanting to take care of all that she perceived was the threat. And even speaking to the doctor in a family meeting of kind of, why would you keep this child on feeding tubes? Why would you keep her alive? And the doctor turned to me and he said to me, Hannah will make a contribution in this world. And his appreciation of my anxiety and what I was speaking to stopped me in my tracks and changed the level of my thinking. Now, it took me about a year to come out of it so that I had a way to think about it. But along the way, I needed two hips replaced and a heart procedure. I personally link the changes in my body with the threat I felt regarding taking care of Hannah. Now, Hannah has two very capable parents. So how did I get my body into this worry? And so I'm very aware of the change that goes on organizationally in those things I'm engaged in, the nodal events, positive or negative, the events in my own life, and then how I respond. This is the first time I've ever responded physically. And I am very appreciative of kind of what happened. And I'm happy to report that 2.5 years later, health has returned. But my sense of threat to me and to my family was enormous with all this change going on. And it took me that long to kind of regroup and come back. Thank goodness I had this way of thinking that allowed me to get beyond the immediate into the long term. So I think that really links. I think we all are part of systems responsive to one another. These systems go through change that create anxiety and that manifests in relationship problems or in health problems or in other kind of problems. And what I think I can do is get a broader perspective so that I can manage my own sense of threat in a more thoughtful way and do the same with clients. And my guess is the same you're dealing with in clergy is that you are managing the threat response. You would use other words, but the threat is, has huge repercussions.
And managing the threat response not only in our family, but in every family where we're serving too, so that there is this constant working of the triangles. I think that Ed Friedman said that we're in just about every triangle in a congregation if we're serving or in an organization, and because the number of families that we interact with is really quite great. So, what occurred to me, and I don't know what you think about this, Kathy, but there is a wonderful story, Old Testament story about Jacob wrestling with an angel, and that his hip is put out of socket as a result, and then he has a limp. And I just noticed with hip replacements that there is a potential for a new identity after hip replacements. And I keep thinking of Jacob, and this was a key personal, spiritual event for Jacob, and the fact that his hip was impacted. So that's the first thing that comes to mind as you're talking about that. And I know that you heard
You're
me
gonna,
talking about Jeremiah last week too. All these, these stories that have in some ways, a deeper meaning about family and about relationship to growth and challenge, kind of thing.
that's hilarious. You're gonna make a Bible scholar out of me yet. That's great. I love it.
But so the other piece I want to just raise is when Bowen talked about the fact that when the anxiety is high, there's these ways it shows itself. Couple, kid having trouble, physical symptoms, and you're talking about a trajectory in your own life that shows different kinds of symptoms reflecting the challenge. How do you see that as are most of our families, do we have like favorite ways we show the anxiety, or do you how do you look at that?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think my family would have a way of dealing with challenge by not addressing it. We're a friendly family. We don't address stuff, so it goes underground. It's easier, and we love each other. We have great times together. So what I came to think about with my kids fighting was this is an opportunity. This is the first out in the open fight. This would speak to me taking up stuff with my family that I don't agree with, instead of always being so kind of get along kind of person. And I do speak my mind, but there's some things um, I don't take up with people because I'm too scared. So this fight requires that I do that. And I have, I can honestly say that my sisters and I probably have never had a fight.
Wow.
A disagreement, and we live very different lives. Um, I have spectacular sisters, but what is it going to take for me to take up with my sister something? And I think that's my work for the new year, is how do I take up with my daughter, my oldest daughter, kind of what I think her part in this is. Because I would be more favoring her way of dealing with this fight than I would my daughter-in-law. How do I take up things with people well? And I think that's my way of doing is to back out. Other families go right at each other. It's preferred. I think there are preferred ways to deal with upset and challenge. Some families, it goes right to illness, or so maybe this is a good thing that we're changing the way we're dealing with difference, because there is, in business, there's a cost to not dealing with things straight out. There's an opportunity cost. And you could say by not dealing with relationship issues, there's a cost. But you also have to know how to deal with them well. And that takes strategy, not automatic. You just don't blast someone or go up and it takes strategy. That's all right I can say now. Emily, you've disappeared.
I should be back. Can you hear me? Okay. My computer lost connection, so this is I'm back. I was frozen for a while, so I didn't hear your response, but everybody else did. This is what I'd like to ask of folks. It is right around 11:30, and I'd like you to start thinking about questions. But I've got another question for Kathy at this point, so that you can overhear this, and then we'll move into some maybe some other responses or thoughts to share. But I wanted to ask Kathy, and Kathy mentioned earlier that she was influenced both by Ed Friedman and by Murray Bowen, but I wonder if you could share your thoughts about the kind of impact that Friedman's had on us, and certainly that is generally the way that clergy enter into this thinking because of the access to things like Generation to Generation and A Failure of Nerve, which are now standard reading in a lot of different traditions. So do you have any thoughts about that, Kathy, that you could share with us?
I do. I think what Dr. Friedman did was he required you to think differently because of the way he thought. So here's an example. I had invited him to come to a presentation of family business consultants. And that's a very social, very relationship-based organization. And we were on a retreat. And so Ed came for lunch, and everyone is trying to relate to him and to be friendly. They're friendly. And Ed very politely said, I need time by myself. And he went over and he sat in a corner and had lunch by himself with his back to everybody. People were incensed. You know, they had all kinds of labels and behavior descriptions for what he did. But there were a couple of us who watched a person think differently about socializing, relationships, speaking. He got you to think differently about relationships, about thinking, about yourself. You know, Bowen's move toward the sciences adds a different level of richness that has added to my life. And learning about the automatic in the brain and in the animal world and adds a whole different level. But Ed added the more social relational learning that goes on. And I found them important both. You know, he taught me a lot with what he did at that one little action. He managed himself so that he would be the best he could be. And everybody else had these wild opinions about who he was and what was the matter with him. And he just did what he knew he needed to do. That's been a big lesson for me. And he did that in lots of things.
I was thinking about the different contributions that people make to thinking from their own framework, and to be more oriented towards the facts is important, especially in emotionally loaded things, but also to see the impact of organizational relationships is really important. So you're saying that I think that Friedman added a broader dimension, and that he was working on it himself, and just by virtue of his introducing little interruptions that to thinking that
oh, absolutely. I mean, there were so many things, you know, besides his writing. You know, somebody said to him something about people call me a bitch, and he said, well, why don't you say, if you think I'm a bitch now, you should have seen me. Really am at my best. I mean, that's a different way of being in the world. And he was that way, and I learned from it. That's a real gift. He provided a real gift. And I did a couple of videos with him, and I think in doing the video, I learned a lot and took that back into my work.
Mm-hmm. I heard a quote, I'm not sure it's true, it was attributed to you, so I'm going to test it out, that you believe that Ed goosed the theory.
Say that again? I didn't hear you.
That you believe that Ed goosed this theory, that that's the description, just kind of made it, it kind of made you be, kind of go, oh, what happened?
Right, 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 right. I mean, I feel really blessed to have both of them, and I think each one added something significantly different as I have been learning over these years.
Mm-hmm.
And I take being with others who think systems very seriously and spend time doing it a lot, because it doesn't take but a minute to go back into cause and effect thinking. You get one difficult person in an organization and a family, and your thinking can go down. It happens very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to open things up, and I've got a first question coming in. One of our participants said that I'm told and then have asked pastors, the church will not do what I know they need to do. What do I need to do to get them off center? How would you respond to that? The church will not, so he's quoting someone, someone saying the church is not going to do what I know they need to do. And he's asked a lot of times, what do I need to do to get them off center? So our participant is asking, how do you respond to that out of this framework? So someone's asking for advice, I think, with a consultant, asking for an answer.
Well, what I hear is the focus on the other. The question always is, what's the least I can do? What's the least Kathy Wiseman can do? And what's the most I can do? So what's the most I can do with the family that's in turmoil? And what's, I can help one person think. I can have a good time with. What can I do? And I would not, in that case, I think I'm hearing this correctly, it's not getting anybody else to do anything. It's what am I going to do in the way I relate to the church that is smart, strategic, has integrity, and is systems-based. It's not getting anybody to do anything. Consulting is about. A consultant comes in, how can I get the father, who, by the way, is a narcissist, to turn it over to his son, because his son, how do I get them to do it? Rather than who in this system is the most interested for self in thinking about this? How can I relate to that person and bring systems ideas? How do I relate to that? I'm never trying to put smarts or ideas. I'm never trying to put insight into anybody else, which is hard not to do.
And I'm thinking for myself, because of my story, I am particularly sensitive to someone saying, what should I do? The part that I play in my family. So I have to slow myself down in those kinds of situations and not react with advice or that answer. And but you're also talking about being able to concentrate on your own functioning, what you're doing as you hear this, and encourage the capacity of the person who comes to you too with that kind of question too. What do you think you need to be about here? Another question, Kathy, comes from. Can you hear me all right? The focus of this conversation is on nodal events, but one of our participants is asking if you see a difference between nodal events and if there are other times of high anxiety. Is there a difference in
well, I think I think nodal events are a way to talk about change in a family where things are moving. But I do think that families have cycles is the wrong way. I can see in my family this we're preparing to say goodbye to the senior generation. It started about 5 years ago. That is a hugely anxious thing to do. And we've come together as cousins to think about how to do that. So there are natural things that happen. You know, everything rebalances it. How you take it on and think about it and address it makes a big difference in the way the family will deal with it. So I think we are in anxious times, more anxious than I think everybody is more amped and more sensitive to each other. And I think that requires, for me, a way to get quieter so I can think in the midst of all this. I do think things are more stimulated. Um, it's hard. It's harder now. You know, I have clients, I'll do a weekend meeting, and by Monday they want the notes to talk about. Well, you know, it takes me a while to think through the notes. I just can't. It's not just dictation. But the requirement is that it'll be back up in email form the next day. That's a very hard process to keep thinking in, that kind of intense communication. So for me, it's setting the expectations with clients of what I'm able to do and can't do.
It's interesting. I've introduced in the classes that I teach periods of time when we use no technology just to observe what happens in class. And I have to say that the level of distraction is much lower. And even though I am fully supportive of forms of technology, to me, the addition of that, what that does to distractedness. And the other piece is security issues. And I know Roberta Gilbert talks quite a bit about that, and Bowen did, about the ramped up issues about safety. Particularly right now, we have major issues about Muslim families feeling very insecure in this country for obvious reasons, and thinking about that contributing to the needs and advice and help, and how to be thoughtful and slow things down just seems really vital.
That it's I'm consulting to several church organizations, and this fear of immigrants is hugely impacting church mission, and it's quite a dilemma for churches who believe the calling is to be open for people in need, especially immigrants. It's a very challenging time.
Really?
That's you can see that in the infrastructure of the church, how that's rattling things.
And the church, at least the Christian church and Jewish tradition too, I'm assuming it's part of the Muslim faith as well, to welcome the stranger, the folks that are in transition.
It's a big part.
I have to put in a plug for Will Ferrell on Saturday Night Live, because last Saturday he said, you know, if your name's not Standing Bear or Sitting Bull, we're all anchor babies. Last Saturday.
That's great. That's great.
We have a question just exploring a little bit more about your story, an encounter with Ed Friedman acting in a way to kind of settle himself. And wondering about, I guess, I'll give you the question and wonder just ask what you think about the question is, after Ed ate lunch and assuming he did a presentation after that, what was going on in the interaction with the group and him following the lunch is the question. Is there anything that question?
The only way I could say it is that maybe 5% of the people could hear him. This was a new organization. They are hell-bent on helping people, being empathetic, solving the dilemmas of the other by listening and having it externalized. They had a completely different view of igniting the capacity of people to manage their own lives. That group was about, let me tell you my experience, let me feel sorry for you, and you'll do better. Ed was, they can figure this out. You got to help them get up for this. Building capacity was Ed's thing. And 5% could hear it. I think it was that time hadn't come. I think the organization of family business consultants has gotten more savvy. But it was while they were business consultants, they were really they were probably Freudian therapists doing, their work on the family. I know you don't do this. So I think Ed was not well. He wasn't a big smash hit. I don't think they got it. This is a long time ago.
Yeah, well, even if there's one or two people who can see something else, that does have an impact too. Maybe not in that context, but I think that that's true in any congregational consulting, or if you move in the direction of, if you just have one or two people that are working on self in a leadership group too, that can shift things. It's not going to be fast. So again, being invested in the long haul rather than what Ed would call the quick fix. And in time,
I agree.
Time change, which we're in, and there is, at least in the Christian church and mainline, there's lots of fear about the death of denominations. The move to easy answers is really profound. There's another response, and this is, I'm just going to read out loud. I haven't had a chance to read it ahead of time. Thinking about nodal events in churches and a pastor's role as a leader, it would seem that it's necessary to learn about past nodal events in order to understand the anxiety. On the other hand, it might be better to simply model certain kinds of ways of operating. What are your thoughts about that?
I think the first comment, understanding the past nodal events that live in the minds of the people. People are acting on that past anxiety. The more you can know it, address it, talk about it, have a good time with it, appreciate it, that is gold in a organization. I think it was you. Did you talk about, when we did our interview, about going back and learning as much as you could about the past pastors of your church and what was going on, what was going on in the world, what happened? You could tell a story of how you got to where you were. I think that is absolutely gold. And I think it could be really fun,
I found, and this is what was part of our conversation last week, is that I was set up by my predecessors, and it was so interesting to be able to know something about how they left and the kind of ministry that they did, and actually to have a relationship with both of them is what I did. So that I only had two goals while I was in that ministry. One was to leave well, and the other was to invite my predecessors back who were not so well. So this participant is noticing that, and you also, Kathy, have done processes. Actually, you did something at the seminary to look at the past nodal events with us during a transition time, which was, I think, really, really quite enlightening from my perspective. But then the participants also saying, what about just focusing on your own functioning? So I'm wondering if the question is both, either, neither.
Well, of course, both. I think knowing the past and being comfortable with it, no matter how peculiar it was, is critical. It's just fundamental because of multi-generational process. Drake writes about, it's all living in the present, so you might as well address it in some way. But the ability to sit in the middle of upset and just be is a gift. There was, the other night, I had a birthday party for my niece, and there were a number of young people there, 26 to 32, and a young woman walked in who had presence. It was like she carried herself. I had never met her. We had never met her. She was different. She was thoughtful and warm and self-contained. And we all know this person's different. I aspire to that. I aspire to be in the midst of all kinds of relationships and to just be. And this woman, Christine, would be someone who you would want to talk to. She was of it, she was in it, but she was different. And I wish, we talked about it afterwards. We all felt that way. There was something very special. And that's something that I aspire to be, present in the middle of that, of relationships, being there, caring about it, but just, she was thinking at a different level, was very noticeable.
Seems to me you do that. Seems to me you do that, Kathy.
I can't hear you, Wiseman.
Seems to me you do that.
Oh, thank you. That would be a nice compliment. To be able to be Christine-like, as we're, or I guess she just was there differently.
And maybe the best we can aspire to is moments like that, and that more of them, and that they're connected to each other too. Great to be in the company of someone like that.
Exactly. I felt really privileged.
I just want to see if there's any other, we've got just 4 more minutes before our time is up, folks. If there are any other thoughts that we can communicate or responses to the conversation today, I would love to hear them. I'm up for repeating those if you have them. And Kathy, as I'm watching the chat box, is there any closing thoughts you might have as well?
I guess I would want to communicate how much thinking systems has added to my life professionally and personally, and that I just welcome anybody who's intrigued by the ideas to keep on, join up, whatever. It has been so rewarding, even in the most difficult of times. It has been, what do they say, a life worth living because of it. My fear level has diminished. Part of that might be neurofeedback, which is a whole other thing, but to be not so fearful of relationship upset and trauma, people getting mad, fighting, and I would imagine that's part of a clergy person's threat response. oh, well, let's keep everybody getting along and, upbeat. So, well, thank you. I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed always talking to you, Emily.
Right back at you, Kathy.
So let me know what kinds of response you get from that. I'm really interested. Each one of the people listening are really kind of Christines in their congregations. And so I guess the question is, what does it take to manage yourself so you can be that way? I got to go back and interview Christine about her family.
What does it take to interact in that way? And to ask that question of ourselves. And it's great. I think that one of the things that's true about a Christian faith is that we talk in terms of moving from faith into what's a walking, talking, like why we believe in Jesus, is that he was a walking, talking embodiment of something. But you're talking about having experienced someone like that and having it be an inspiration or a model or a challenge, maybe, to be more of that, be more of a self.
Well, I was remembering what you said when we did our interview, that you are with people at the most challenged, meaningful times in their lives. I mean, that's your work. What an honor. But how hard it would be to change your approach if you were an empathy person to a building capacity person. What it would take. Will you ponder that and let me know?
I'm writing that down, and this is, in part of that was our discussion last week about the fact that most of us in this profession have highly honed empathy capacities, and so how to move into building the self and relational capacities rather than just taking on the spongy kind of stuff of assuming the emotionality of those around us.
Right.
So we'll keep thinking together about this, and with the 27 people who have participated in this, I want to just pass on for you, Kathy, that there's lots of thanks that are appearing in the chat box, and so hopefully this is spurring some additional thinking, and I want to put in a plug for January 15th will be our next conversations piece with Walter Brueggemann, an Old Testament scholar. So would love to have you, Kathy. Here I am talking to you about Old Testament things all the time. Would love to have you join us.
I love it. Jeremiah, Jacob, the hips.
Right. All right.
My Bible.
Right. Blessings to everyone, and a happy holiday, a challenging holiday season. We'll just put it that way.
Right. I love what we're gonna work on moving from empathy to capacity. This is great. Thank you. Bye, dear. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
How do we do this?
Just close down.